So, Jordan, you kind of set Dolphins Twitter ablaze earlier this week. You asked Dolphins fans, I'm interested in your thoughts. What happens if the Texans pick, they've since fired Bill O'Brien, ends up being the number one overall pick? Obviously, the implication here, Dolphins just drafted Tua Tagovailoa with a top 5 pick. Trevor Lawrence, perceived generational talent. Did you expect to get the kind of traction that came out of this hypothetical that you had posed from a ton of engagement and a ton of opinions from folks?
Yeah, I actually didn't, but I mean, we both know that Dolphins Twitter, once they find something that is attractive, they go all in on it. But I just kind of wanted an outside perspective about it, and we both talked about this. I believe it was about a week ago when I brought up this really tough hypothetical for you, and you had to take some time to think about it yourself. But I think it's something that could come to fruition, and I'm not saying that the Texans are going to have the number one pick. I don't think they're number one pick bad, but it's not just the Texans that could end up in this situation. There's a lot of other teams that have young quarterbacks right now that could be put in a similar situation. But just staying on topic with the Dolphins perspective, I think the first thing that we have to have answered is we have to know something of what Tua Tagovailoa is, just because, I mean, he's a question mark right now. And what I mean by a question mark is that we don't know exactly what he is. And we're kind of all expecting him to start week 7. That seems like a soft point for him against the Chargers in a couple of weeks. So maybe he'll finish out the year. And I think that'll be a really good synopsis of what the team really could think about him going into next year, 2021. But if he doesn't show well, I think they have to ask themselves, like, there's a real strong possibility that we should take Trevor Lawrence, just because if I'm Brian Flores and I'm Chris Greer, I have to evaluate my roster as a whole, and I have to put myself in the best situation as I possibly can. It's no secret that Trevor Lawrence is probably the best quarterback prospect since Andrew Luck. That's probably the stigma that's going to follow him. And we know the durability issues linger over Tua's head, and there's still no guarantee that he's going to stay healthy throughout his career. But I have a quarterback at Clemson he looks really good right now. He's 31-1 in his career at Clemson. He's a true winner. He has everything that you want in a quarterback prospect. And I know Dolphins fans love Tua. We know about the tank for Tua mantra that followed him all the way through being the number 5 overall pick. But you kind of have to separate the players and really evaluate the team as a whole and who puts the team in the best situation. I think you'll get a huge haul for either one that you do end up trading, but you have to do what's best for the team going forward. Now, this is not a possibility until we figure out exactly what Tua Tagovailoa is. So that's just my opinion on the hypothetical, and I thought it was a really interesting topic that could really come to fruition here once we see what Tua is.
So a couple things to unpack here. First of all, how do we get to this point? The Houston Texans are a Deshaun Watson injury away from being the number 1 pick because they're bad to begin with. Their defense is horrendous. They can't stop the run. They're averaging 186 rushing yards allowed per game. They haven't forced a single turnover in the first 4 games of the season. They just fired Bill O'Brien. That's kind of a coin toss what that could do to this football team, right? But your expectation is if you win 2 games, it's about 3/4 of the time you get the number 1 overall pick. Houston with Deshaun Watson will win more than 2 games. But if Deshaun were to get injured, the Dolphins could see themselves in this situation where this transpires. And Jordan, I think you talking about putting aside the emotional attachment for Tua is important because look at what the Dolphins are doing now with Ryan Fitzpatrick, where they are remaining steadfast that Ryan Fitzpatrick gives us the best chance to win. They don't care about the court of public opinion. They never has since Chris Greer and Brian Flores stepped into power in 2019. And there's something that we've talked about in our staff meetings that I think is really relevant here. And it's what is the job and responsibility of the general manager is to upgrade every position on the team. And there's no question the Dolphins forecasted quarterback now versus when they took over when Ryan Tannehill was there is a better long-term outlook. But as you said, we need to know something about Tua Tagovailoa before we can confidently say that he is the firm answer that the Dolphins have been looking for ever since Dan Marino left.
Right, and it's just a fascinating topic, and that's why I wanted to get some outside opinions. And as expected, opinions were all over the place. And I think we're kind of in agreement on this, in that as the general manager, you just have to evaluate the roster as a whole. And if Trevor Lawrence puts my roster in a better situation than what Tua Tagovailoa does at this point, I think you have to take them. And people were saying let them battle it out in training camp. I don't even think you have to do that, honestly, just because there's no way you can keep both of those guys on the roster, just because it's going to be such a stench going into training camp. And I think you eventually have to end up trading one of those guys. But It's usually whoever the latest draft pick is the one that ends up
Right.
staying with the team. And there's no way you can trade Trevor Lawrence just because let's say he goes on and he lives up to expectations and ends up being what a lot of people thought Andrew Luck was going to end up being
Oh,
prior
you'd
to his
never live it
retirement.
down.
You'd never live it down. And it's going to be like a situation of where both of those guys are really compared hip and hip just because you have both of them on your roster and you're always going to be known as trading the wrong guy.
So when you first posed this hypothetical, my mind first went to, yes, take him, let him compete, trade the loser in training camp. But you brought up a good point. And I kind of thought about this as we were preparing to have this conversation this morning myself, like that human component of it, like what the message that it sends to Tua Tagovailoa and the message that it sends to Trevor Lawrence for this to happen, like the competition's effectively done. And to be fair, in covering the Miami Dolphins for USA Today, there's been Dolphins fans that have been asking me for 2 years, let's just do a 2-year tank like the Browns did and get Trevor Lawrence. 1-31, sign us up. Like we get Trevor Lawrence. Well, if you luck into it with all of the positive progress that your roster has made because of a deal for an offensive tackle that went on to get $22 million a year in Laramie Tunsil, like you're playing with house money at this point, right? So you invested a top 5 pick into Tua Tagovailoa, provided he doesn't come out and play poorly, he's going to have market. And something that you and I just got done talking with the rest of the TDN staff is this quarterback market across the league-wide, it feels like it's static, but some of these incumbents that have been long-term incumbents, there's going to be teams that are ready to move, whether it's the Pittsburgh Steelers or the Atlanta Falcons, Detroit Lions. Like we've had these conversations about these teams, and you don't mean to tell me that a playoff team wouldn't die to get a chance to get a top 5 pick who maybe plays 8 games for the Dolphins his rookie season and comes out and looks like he has the potential to live up to what his expectations were? Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, you're going to get a first round pick for Tua. I think there's no question about that just because you're talking about a guy that was a top flight prospect. And yes, I know the injury history is a big question mark about him, but as far as just the talent, there's plenty of teams that would be salivating over getting Tua, especially for these teams that have an older quarterback, as you mentioned.
So weird hypothetical to think about. It's kind of, this is why you justify building through the draft to a certain degree as well, right? Because it gives you more flexibility. If the Dolphins were hard and fast, and this is why I think teams that build with, volume of draft picks in mind have such an advantage because they can constantly kind of pivot and use not only the picks as assets, but those picks turn into players, which are then assets that you can constantly be more flexible with how you construct your team in the early stages because you have so many more assets at your disposal instead of having guys that are locked in with bulky contracts. Like if the Houston Texans now decide to do a quasi rebuild, you can't shed cap and trade Laramie Tunsil. You saw the heaven and earth the LA Rams had to move to try to trade Todd Gurley, right? Where that was a bad contract after 18 months. So building through the draft and using those draft picks as assets, like that's a big advantage for teams to choose to do it that way. And this would be a hypothetical that I think really kind of proves that methodology in the upside of doing it that way.
It is, and we both know the Seattle Seahawks started this with Russell Wilson. The greatest weapon to roster building in the NFL is having a cheap quarterback. And they basically will be restarting that cycle all over again. They will be pressing the rewind button 1 year with Trevor Lawrence as opposed to Tua Tagovailoa just because he would already be exhausted of 1 year of his rookie deal. So you're basically starting all over with that quarterback, that young rookie deal that you have in place. And we talk about this team that still has plenty of draft capital, and then they're still developing these young players as well. And I think Trevor is the type of prospect that's going to make a lot of these guys look better during their second and even third year in their careers. We're talking about Robert Hunt and Austin Jackson and all these young guys that they have on offense. And we'll see some of these other young guys they add through the draft. I'm sure they'll do a good job of that in the future too. And that's not no shot against Tua. I think he's going to be a really good pro as well. But I think we both can agree that there's levels to this quarterback prospect stuff. And Trevor Lawrence is just on another level than Tua Tagovailoa as far as just prospects. Now, we don't know exactly what they're going to be on the next level. That's still a question mark for both of them. But just evaluating both of them coming into the draft, if it was me personally and I have the number 1 pick, there's just no way I could turn down Trevor Lawrence.
I agree. And Tua was my 3rd highest rated quarterback prospect going back to 2015. So Joe Burrow was 1, Baker Mayfield was 2, Tua Tagovailoa was 3. I can guarantee you right now, Trevor Lawrence is going to be above him when we stack it and add those 2021 guys. So I'm right there with you. I think that's dead on. We'll see how the season progresses. We're obviously a quarter of the way through, but this is definitely going to be a subplot to watch unless Houston kind of gets this ship